Nobody knows how hard it is to get on the ballot, given all the obstructions by the two parties, until you actually try to do it. There's no country in the Western world that comes close to obstructing voters and candidates like the USA. So let's cut this business that we're number one. We're like 18th in infant mortality, 16th in wages, number one in number of people incarcerated in prisons per capita because of this crazy war on drugs, non-violent offenders who are addicted to drugs. It's a medical problem. We don't send nicotine addicts to jail, do we? We don't send alcoholics to jail. It's a health problem, rehabilitation, compassion. My idea, as I mentioned a few days ago, was to empty the prisons of these nonviolent drug offenders, massive prosecution of the corporate crooks, put them in jail. I'll tell you one thing, prison conditions would improve, the food will get better. Huh? You never hear about it in the presidential campaign, do you? They never talk about law and order. Here says John McCain and Barack Obama, law and order. And we're going to really crack down. We're going to prevent these violations of health and safety laws by corporations in the workplace and the environment, product defects, non-recall of defect. They don't want to talk about it. Take a little time and look at all the redirections and changes in our country that Nader Gonzalez are advancing based on years of experience, years of advocacy, years of scaling the corporate mountains, years of persistence, years of showing people it doesn't take as much as they think if they would organize all over the country to overcome the corporate domination of our government, of our elections, of our political economy. Let's not exaggerate what it takes from us. All right, I want to start out with two simple observations, one made over 2,000 years ago, one made about 800 years ago. Marcus Cicero defined freedom this way, the ancient Roman lawyer. Freedom is participation in power. Keep that in mind. When you ask yourself how much freedom you have, how much participation in power. And second, the Ming Dynasty, Chinese philosopher, 14th century or so, said, to know and not to do is not to know. To know and not to do is not to know. Now, those two precepts reflect the level of self-respect we have for ourselves as stalwart, vigorous, effective, powerful citizens, promoting a functioning democracy that begins to make the necessities of life automatically met just by the process of growing up in our country. If that appears to be utopian, let me suggest otherwise. The great economist John Maynard Keynes, Britain, in the 1930s said that the level of activity of modern economies is such that it won't be very long before the economic problem will be solved. And what he meant was no more poverty, no more hunger, no more lack of shelter, no more being denied health care, no more being denied necessities of life. So there's no more excuse. These economies are hugely productive, worker productivity was increasing, and innovation was going on, and there's no reason for anybody to have this level of economic problem. Well, in the early 20th century, you heard Matt Gonzalez mention Eugene Debs. In the early 20th century, Debs was asked at the end of his career, he ran for president for about five times. I have a unique affinity with him. So, great labor leader, probably the greatest labor leader in our country's history. And he was asked by a reporter. He said, the reporter said, Mr. Debs, what's your greatest regret? And Mr. Debs looked at the reporter and said, my greatest regret? Here's my greatest regret. My greatest regret is that under our Constitution, the American people can have almost anything they want, but they don't seem to want much of anything That goes to the expectation level, doesn't it? Now, fast forward 1945, end of World War II. The U.S. is the Colossus, the most powerful economic, technological, military force in the world. Western Europe, rubble, in ruins, devastated. Cities, countryside, disease, the smoke still coming up from the devastation of that war. The people in Western Europe, starting from rubble, working through their social democratic parties, multi-party system, working through their trade unions, working through their cooperatives, and just raising their expectation level about what kind of life they wanted to have. That they really wanted to work in order to live, not what they say about us in this country, where we live in order to work. And here's what they did. Through their institutions and through their public demands and marches and rallies and strikes, this is what they demanded by law for all their people. They demanded universal health insurance, and they got it. They demanded decent pensions, and they got it. They demanded a living wage, and they got it. They demanded university-free tuition, and they got it. They demanded daycare, and they got it. They demanded public transit, and they got it. They demanded paid maternity leave and paid family sick leave, and they got it. They demanded laws that facilitated forming trade unions and cooperatives, and they got it. And 63 years later, in the land of the free, in the home of the brave, we don't have any of this by law for everyone. Some labor union contracts may have this and that. There are people working for the federal government who don't even get paid maternity leave. We don't have it 63 years later. Now, who's dominated the political scene for 63 years? The Republicans and the Democrats. They didn't get it done in the 40s. They didn't get it done in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. Even when the Democrats controlled the White House and both houses of Congress, they didn't get it done. What makes anybody in this country think that these two parties indentured to corporate power and their corporate paymasters will ever get it done?